Welcome to the Athletic FC podcast with me, Akinwolere. Has the Premier League been a little boring this season, especially compared to a thrilling round of Champions League knockout ties? Right, with me today in the studio, we have the Athletics' Duncan Alexander and Jack Pitt-Brooke as well. Good to have you with us, gents. Duncan, where are we right now? Because if you think about it, football does go around in trends, you know. Are we looking at uber-coached Premier League players? Are we looking at faster football? Is it tactically so different than it was from previous years?
I mean, it has improved a lot, I would say. I mean, I think we saw 2016, a lot of managers came into the league, including Guardiola in it. Since then, that's nearly a decade ago, and we have seen the Premier League sort of standard go up and up. You know, look at someone like Edison, a goalkeeper. His pass completion for his career is higher than Paul Scholes' was when he was obviously playing in midfield a long time ago. So, yeah, I think we are definitely at a point where the standard throughout the league is higher than ever. I think you probably put a team like current Fulham, if you had a time machine, take them back to the mid-90s, they'd win the Premier League by an absolute mile. It's a combination of tactics, fitness, dedication. You know, players are sort of more dedicated, fitter, healthier than ever. And I think the enjoyment's still there for me.
Yeah. It's funny, isn't it? Like, I remember when Guardiola came in 2016, the big question was, does he understand our game? And do you remember the whole fuss about what is tackles?
Yeah.
So this was after City lost to, I think it was Leicester City in that first season, where they were really poor and only just scraped top four. And somebody asked Guardiola if he coached tackles. And he said, I'm not a coach for the tackles. And this was like a big media storm about this. Like, he doesn't understand. If you don't understand tackling, you can't understand English football. Yeah. And 8 years on, the question is not does he understand English football? It's has he killed English football?
But at the same time, Guardiola's come out this season and said stuff like that second balls are more important than ever. Like, in some ways, English football has taken Guardiola and kind of brought him into that realm just as much, I think. So he's adapted his game. I mean, if you look at some of the way City set up now, you know, playing long to Haaland or, you know, Edison, as we said, has got 4 assists this season. It's not like they're playing tick-a-tacker football.
Not at all,
Yeah, so I do think that, you know, he's quite an Anglophile, Guardiola, and I think he has taken on some of that Englishness into his tactics.
I think you're spot on, and he talks about the heritage of English football a lot and how much he's really studied it over time. But sort of on the Guardiola conversation, you know, we look at a player like Jack Grealish, who some might say seemed a bit freer at Aston Villa compared to, I guess, a much more rigid structure he's facing at Manchester City. Is there also a conversation here that, like, perhaps, you know, certain players are either not allowed to be as creative because of these really solid systems, like a Guardiola system, for instance?
Yeah, I mean, like, I definitely think that the way that Pep wants to play is the most coordinated, synchronized style of play I think we've probably seen in the Premier League. Like, there is just there's less individuality, I think, in how he wants the team to attack, particularly with the ball. And obviously the weird thing for Grealish is that Grealish joined City from a Villa team where he was kind of a bit of a throwback in his individualness, his freeness within that system. Like, it felt like watching Grealish at Villa felt like you were watching something from the 90s or the 2000s, or even the start of the 2010s, where I thought, you know, if you look at like Suarez at Liverpool, Van Persie, Bale, like, there was a huge amount of scope for individuality, even as recently as 15 years ago, and Grealish was a throwback to that. But I think he's found the transition from individuality to kind of coordinated, synchronized team play to be such a big leap. I feel like he just doesn't look the same player, although I was about to say, like, this is just the state of modern football. And then I remember, I'm old enough to remember has Jose Mourinho like shackled Joe Cole debate? That was 20 years ago. Sure. So it's kind of, you know, it's a different style, it's a different way of playing, but the issue is not itself new.
Yeah, for sure.
I think that's the thing. It's cyclical. It happens every decade. Every generation of fans will suddenly, at some point, go, I remember so-and-so from 15 years ago. They were great. I'm sure people in the 1930s were doing it about players around the First World War. You know, it's just
where real men were playing football,
right? Proper. Before they changed the offside law.
Herbert Chapman coached all the individuality out of our game.
But Michael Cox did a great piece a few months ago going through Herbert Chapman's book, like it was a collection of his writing from, you know, obviously from the 30s. And all the complaints then were exactly the same as now. You know, there's no individualism anymore. Players are concentrating on fitness more than sort of flair. It's just everything is cyclical.
Yeah, the darned word PSR, guys. Like, you know, how are you genuinely trying to be a decent team, play good football and also hopefully qualify for European football, try and keep consistent with the domestic cups as well, when you're not able to spend that much money.
Yeah, this is why this is like my theory of why Liverpool have been good this season, is that I think that, like, generally speaking, the last like 5-10 years, most managers in the Premier League have just thought that their job is just to like crank that intensity lever as hard as possible. And that's how you got like City repeatedly getting to 90 points, Klopp's Liverpool getting into the 90s. Whereas my impression of Slot's Liverpool is that he's the first manager who's twigged that at this point, with players as tired as they are and the schedule as difficult as it is, you can't crack the intensity lever all the time. You have to find a way to like pick your moments to press. Don't play at full intensity all the time. Give the players a little bit more time off. And I wonder whether, and maybe it's no coincidence that Liverpool's not suffered any injuries this season, and they're going to win the league. And so I just wonder whether Slot has kind of landed on something which maybe other teams could learn from.
Is that quite different to Ange Postecoglou, who wants his team to constantly play on that front throttle? And actually, you're also seeing the back end of that with a whole heap of injuries with his team.
Yeah, I mean, I think it feels like Postecoglou's like the last figure of as Jack says, a sort of movement that's almost had its day. And Liverpool, they start a lot of games really slowly this season, really sort of, take the vibe of the game and then ease themselves into it. And I think it really has helped. And to Jack's point about points, this is what league tables often look like in the sort of late 90s, early 2000s. But people did get used to City getting 100 and Liverpool and City ended on 98, 97 and that's the not normal thing.
Yeah, exactly.
But to the flip of that is that a couple of those seasons, I think 18-19, the run-in when City and Liverpool were head-to-head, they basically both won every week for about 4 months. The quality of football and intensity of football that season was amazing. But that's the sort of freak season, not this one.
Okay, Duncan, let's talk about goals, right? In the Premier League this season, it's averaging about 2.94 goals per game, the second highest ever. But can high goal average also hide a deeper problem? And by that, I was with Rob Lee, old Newcastle player, on Friday, and he was talking about defending in a weird way and how the art of defending sort of disappearing. You spoke about Edison being a great ball player. Defenders similar. Saliba's up there with one of the biggest ball carriers this season. Are defenders not as good as they used to be as well?
I think they have more to do now, don't they? They're exposed a lot more. I think obviously last season we saw 3.28 goals per game, which is by far, it's the highest goals per game rate in an English top flight season since the 1960s. That really was a kind of outlier. But yeah, people have sort of, I think we're on 2.97 actually at the moment, which is, again, the second highest, as you said. And that's also an outlier, but people have I think I've seen people say, there's not many goals this season. We're also on for the second lowest proportion of 0-0 draws after last season, and the second highest proportion of away wins after the kind of weird 2021 no fans, non-canon season. Right, but a lot of these things are kind of what people, if you stop someone on the street and said, what do you want from your football? Lots of goals. No, not many 0-0 draws. The away team have got a chance. The mid-table are all competitive. This is what people have been asking for ages. And yet when it comes along, everyone's like, actually not sure if it's what I want.
Why, can you think of a reason why people would think this season has been boring, given the cold, hard facts that you've just deployed?
I think it's because it's quite rare to probably get to a point where the title's done, the relegation battle's done, and even the fact Spurs and Man United are struggling, that takes out sort of two of the big six in terms of drama. Their fans are kind of like, kind of already looking forward to next season in league terms, obviously. So I accept that, yes, that there's probably not as much end of season excitement as some other seasons, but I don't think it validates all the stuff that got us to this point. Some of the football I think in kind of October, November was really, really good. There's some really, high quality Premier League games, But I guess the media cycle now is so kind of relentless that, people sort of have already forgotten that.
Yeah, I'm just on this sort of conversation about lots of goals as well. Jack, 51 games this season have been comeback wins. Maybe not the Man Uniteds of this world or, the Chelseas of this world, but they have been those matches. And on pace to match last season's record, that's a huge sign that matches, in many respects, are far from predictable. But also I'm thinking about the lens in which we're looking at this. If you're a Nottingham Forest fan, this is the greatest season of your life, surely. In with the FA Cup, potentially finishing in a position where you'd be back in Europe again after all these years. You know what I mean? The lens surely is different depending on who you're looking at.
Yeah, definitely. And I think Forest are clearly like the story of the season, right? Like they're, even aside from the FA Cup run, they've been amazing in the Premier League, and and it's probably been the one that's been the most surprising. Like at the start of the season, quite a few people, me included, had Forest to go down. And so I think that has been the biggest single surprise, and it does show that, I think a lot of the kind of noise, not just this season but over the last 5 years, has been the problem with the Premier League is it's too stratified, it's too financially stratified, and if you're not in the top 6 spenders, you're not going to finish in the top 6. Sure. Whereas Forest, and I'm not saying that's not true, but obviously Forest kind of a bit of a repudiation of that.
I mean, one theory is that there's only kind of 5 or 6 templates for a Premier League season, and we're kind of living through a bit of a 15-16 season here, where a lot of the big teams are struggling, and a team from the East Midlands, Forest in this case, have kind of capitalised, not as much as Leicester did that year, but if you go through the history of the Premier League, you can sort of see, you can kind of compartmentalise quite a lot of the seasons, and each category kind of has its own kind of criticisms, I think, when people experience them. But, in terms of the goal stuff, you go back to, Jack mentioned the Mourinho era earlier, that was the lowest.
15 goals conceded, right?
Yeah. Petr Cech only conceded 13 in 35 games, which is baffling, but did happen. But people then were like, there's no excitement anymore. And Sky had a habit then of putting all the big 4 clashes on the same weekend, and they'd often end 2-0 or a 0-0 and a 1-0, and everyone was just like, we've kind of lost the essence of football here. So I think each era has its kind of, people kind of quite enjoy moaning, don't they, sometimes?
Yeah.
And kind of find the fault.
That was what Jorge Valdano called the S word on a stick football era. And, we've obviously moved, football is obviously so different now than it was 20 years ago. And yet people will try to make similar complaints, right?
But also, I think, we talk about the Jose Mourinho season. You ask me any Chelsea fan that want to take those trophies based on that sort of dull football, right? It's like, genuinely, what do you want from your team? Do you want them to win stuff, or do you want them to stay in the Premier League as well?
It's like the 1990 World Cup. Go around most countries in the world and it's detested for low scoring, just a series of back passes. Yeah. But go to Ireland or England and it's revered as one of the great moments because, winning. You see with football fans whose team are struggling, they say stuff like, I've just really fallen out of love with football at the moment. Yeah. It's funny, if your team won 8 games in a row, you might rediscover that passion.
Yeah, for sure. Where do we stand? And I'll throw this to both of you, actually, with sort of the underachievement of the classic Big Six. Manchester United are always in the headlines, and how badly they've done this season, or at least the decline we've seen over the last few years. I mean, does anyone deserve to be up there anymore? Are we judging a league's success by the fact that the usual players are top of the league, or are we just celebrating the fact that this is a way more diverse space for anyone, and there is no game where anyone is destined to win?
Yeah, I mean, I think I know we've just come out of this era of having two big teams playing unbelievable high quality, going for the title. Yeah. And I do think this season has missed that a bit. I mean, I think this season for drama would have been much better if Arsenal had been 10-15% better. And if we'd had a genuine Arsenal-Liverpool title race, I think that could have been really, really good. I don't know if I'm trying to think, is there can you find a root cause which explains why lots of those teams other than Liverpool have been bad? I mean, with Arsenal, I think it might just be the gaps, the points gap is quite big, but the performance gap, I think really you can just look at it as being a few key injuries and a bit of bad luck.
Yeah, I mean, Arsenal dropped as many points this season as the previous 2 combined, almost. Right. And I think that's it. They've just not seen games out in the way that they were in the previous couple of campaigns, and obviously they've had a number of bad injuries. But yeah, I go back to my point that this is kind of what happened in 15-16, and that, I guess, ushered in a bit of a new era. That was the season Klopp came into Liverpool, and then obviously the following summer Conte came to Chelsea and Guardiola to City. So it doesn't feel like this summer's going to be as transformative, but we have kind of gone through an era. I think we probably are approaching. It does feel like the league's in flux at the moment a little bit. I mean, I'm not convinced Liverpool are going to be as good necessarily next season, so that kind of really does open it up next season. Maybe it will be Arsenal, maybe it'll be someone we've not thought of. So.
Should we start getting used to Brentford's, Bournemouth's, Aston Villa's, Nottingham Forest, dare I say it, in the next 2 or 3 seasons? We are in a very strange position, but do you see this is my question, do you see the natural order sort of forming back again to some degree?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I guess the question is can they make up for what they can't spend on wages, right? Like,
Yeah.
can you, if you're of that level of team, can you be so clever and so efficient that you make up for the fact that, like City and United and the big teams will be spending, let's say, 150, 200 million pounds more per season on salaries? Because there is an argument that mid-table Premier League teams are so rich relative to the rest of Europe that they can still buy a good enough team to be really competitive at the top end, which I buy to an extent, but I suspect that ultimately money will always make the difference, and that even the most intelligent, efficient team from the mid section of the Premier League will not be able to bridge the gap to the teams that can just blow them out of the water on salaries.
Yeah, and you mentioned PSR earlier, and I think last summer we saw a very strange kind of shuffle of squads, didn't we? Like Elliot Anderson going to Forest, and that obviously really helped Forest, but hasn't hindered Newcastle. But then Newcastle obviously have got players like Guimaraes and Isak, who other clubs would love to have. So I think we're kind of getting towards a sort of Serie A in the 90s sort of transfer model, where I think the internal transfer market is so competitive because everyone can see what these players can do week in, week out. And you do wonder, like, if you look at Forest, how many of that team might get picked off this summer if they do qualify for the Champions League, and then that obviously impacts them in the Champions League next season.
I suspect not as many as would have been the case in the past, right? Because in the sort of pre-PSR era, if Forest were having a season as good as that, then, I mean, like, Elanga to Man United is a bad example because he obviously played for them, but a team like Man United or whoever would say, Elanga, going to have him, going to have Gibbs White, going to have Hudson-Odoi. But nowadays, like, in the era of PSR, I mean, firstly, there's no, like, Marinakis would just not want to sell these players, but also in the era of PSR, like, they would cost so much money that, it wouldn't make sense for a Big Six team to spend 100 million quid on one of them when you could when you could find like a younger, cheaper version maybe abroad.
I think that's
so
the
PSR
thing.
keeps the players at the teams.
Yeah, I think it does. And to your point, obviously, Leicester won the league and Mahrez went to City and Danny Drinkwater went to Chelsea, less successfully, probably. But it proves the point. I think, and I think it's good. That's good for the league as well. I think it does. It should keep it a little bit more competitive than it would have been in the past.
Okay. Look, a lot of us think about that period, the mid-2000s, 2010 kind of space, aka the Barclays era. Many of us think that was the pinnacle of football players like Gerrard, Lampard, all those kind of stalwarts, Drogba. But the reality is, there's going to be a whole heap of young people who have come into the Pep Guardiola era, and that is just a thing of the past. Isn't that the danger, though? We're all living in our moment of where we remember it having our best players and the best matches that we remember. Perhaps that's not a global or national conversation.
I think it's an age thing, isn't it? Like, the footballers you remember when you're, I don't know, between 14 and 22 are the ones that are emblazoned in your mind forever. I still think about Gary Flitcroft too much, but I think that's the thing. Like, we're at a point where people with a lot of kind of social media voice are that era, and it was quite an interesting phenomenon. The sort of sudden 2-week international break celebration of just a litany of Barclaysman thing, and but people have always done that. People have always enjoyed just remembering old footballers.
Listing footballers.
Yeah.
But isn't that the beauty of it, though? Like, even if it turns into this sort of generational conversation, you're going to have that chat with your old man or your mom or your granddad being like, Sir Stanley Matthews back in my day was the man. I mean, that's the joy of football. But is it relevant to today?
Yeah. I mean, I guess it's... People always like making comparisons, I guess. People always like the sense of history. I kind of traditionally think that football is not that historically conscious relative to other sports. I feel like people, I don't know, I feel like I feel like certainly in this country, like people's like interest in football history is like very limited, I think, to like 1966, Clough, Shankly, Busby, Ferguson. I think in the main, like, there's not quite so much curiosity about like pre-Second World War football, for example.
WM merchants.
That's much more niche.
But I do think, though, like, if you're a club, I know we've spoken about Forest a lot. If you are a club like Forest, obviously it's not pre-war, but like, what else are you holding on to? That is all you are holding on to when you've had this huge lull for so long. You know, it is relevant to bring those times up a little bit, that your dad would be like, when I used to watch Forest, they were bloody lifting European Cups. Not now, but they used to be.
But when I was a kid in the 90s, all I heard from older people talking about football was like, this modern football, it's not what it's at. The 70s, that was where you had like proper individual players who could, just did what they wanted. And then now, even, the 2000s players are now seen as this archetype of, your Berbatovs. They didn't care about tactics, they just went out there and scored goals. It's like, they did care about tactics, otherwise they wouldn't have been playing in the Premier League. So
like that kind of, it's that nostalgia for like I was saying earlier, like Berbatov, Suarez, Van Persie, Bale era. But then people will find a way to be nostalgic about stuff that actually happened incredibly recently. Like the other day, there's a clip that people always post on social media of Vincent Kompany and Diego Costa challenging for the ball when it was a brilliant game. It's when Antonio Conte's Chelsea beat Guardiola City in the 16-17 season at the Etihad, and it's like people always write on it something like, back when men were men, and like football was all about physical battle. And I found myself watching it thinking, look what they took from us. Look how good football used to be, when they used to have real physical confrontation between real players with real personalities and charisma, unlike the kind of drones that play modern football. And then I kind of got myself into this mood of nostalgia about it. And then I think, come on, Jack,
Let's be having ya.
This is only 2016. Like, this is Conte and Guardiola are two of the best managers of the modern era. They're not like throwback managers.
The problem is, as well, in the 90s, you can only really see sort of montages occasionally. Maybe your friend had a video or VHS or something, but now they're everywhere. But montages don't tell you what football's like. There are a few games from the 2000s in full on YouTube, and I would recommend going and watching a few of them. And I mean, a lot of the football is just goal kicks. Is just 20 outfield players roughly near the centre circle, and the ball just being smashed towards them. So, it's people are picking out the good bits.
It's like when, I mean, you mentioned Italia 90 earlier. Like, I think there was a time a few years ago, maybe during the pandemic, where they would show full matches from Euro 96. And obviously Euro 96 has this like sainted place in our particularly for people of my age. Like I turned 8, I think, just before Euro 96. And so for me, this was like the most astonishing thing of all time. And anybody in their like mid-30s or older will be able to talk at great length about Euro 96. If you go, and I hate to say it, but if you go back and watch it with modern eyes, it's not great.
Yeah.
Like, it's really even like, I mean, obviously England were really good against Holland, but like England-Scotland is not a good game. England-Spain is a profoundly bad game.
You're forgetting the technology was different. The ball wasn't moving the same way. People weren't hitting a knuckleball free kick like Cristiano Ronaldo would be doing naturally, because everything's different. The kits are slimmer. They were literally dragging towels around as kits. Like, it was so baggy. Like, now you look at it, now it's a whole different era.
Yeah, we did some analysis before the Carabao Cup final last year when Newcastle got to it against United and at their last Wembley appearance in the 50s, and that is a different sport. I mean, you had flair players, but they had about 8 seconds on the ball every time they got it. There was no closing down. So I think it's the fitness that has been the real change. The kind of the speed and the fitness of modern football has changed how it's played, because you don't get any time on the ball. And if you go to a Premier League game now and see how quickly players can manipulate the ball and think, it's outstanding.
And something that's also interesting to point out is that in terms of outlets of talking about the game, let's not discount the fact that we're sitting here on a podcast talking about football. I mean, how many podcasts would be dedicated to Berbatov alone, let alone talking about the game? You look at TikTok, you look at social media, you look at punditry, which has changed so much. Do you think that also, in a very strange way, with all that noise, gents, has perhaps contributed to a caution in the game, whether it be referees being scrutinised over and over again, whether it be players being scrutinised for either diving or doing something crazy on the field, or not just performing at their optimum?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how much. I don't know how much tactics and how the game is played would be influenced by external media noise. I'm generally of the view that managers don't really care. Like if a manager coming up with a plan to win a particular game will just, I mean, they care about if people are nice about them, but they won't like change how they approach a game based on the sort of media noise about their style, I think.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think I mean, it's always baffling that the kind of big Ron meltdown and the Keegan meltdown were within 5 weeks of each other in '96, and that again is like a different time where I think managers did get more rattled because the kind of media attention then was quite new. I think, as Jack says, they're just kind of used to it now. It's just noise.
Would you think, I mean, I'm just throwing it out there, a coach like Ange Postecoglou, for instance, who hasn't had the best season at Tottenham, how hard is it to cut out all that noise? Because not just us on podcasts, but you've also got reporters, I think, are a bit more poignant with their questions, and they'll go there because the pool of reporters now is much wider than it used to be as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of managers do. I think a lot of managers are very conscious of the kind of intensity of the media environment. Like the media environment now is very 24/7. It's quite hard to switch off from. But I wouldn't say the media environment now is more critical than it used to be. I actually think that the media environment of 20, 30 years ago was a lot harder. Like when, particularly, like if the papers had it in for a particular manager, and they were, they would have no qualms about really, giving a battering to a particular manager who they didn't like.
Yeah, I mean, we've mentioned the 1990 World Cup, but like the situation between Bobby Robson and the press at that World Cup, and then subsequently with Graham Taylor and all the turnip headlines. I mean, you'd never get that now.
No, not at all. That
and that's
really
old. Just
now.
point out that's a good thing. That you wouldn't get that now.
All right. Well, let's move on because let's talk about the Premier League versus the Champions League. And I must caveat this, obviously, that the Champions League is a tournament and the Premier League is a whole season-long league. But, why does the Champions League knockout stages this season seem so much more exciting in many respects than the Premier League? We've seen what we've seen with PSG, and this team sort of grown with the tournament now, looking absolute dynamite. Barcelona, again, beating Dortmund, and a team that's grown and found itself in this competition. Beautiful attackers, the styles are different. Why do you think there's more action in that kind of space? Is it because we are genuinely in the knockout stages, or do you just think it's a different flex of different managers?
Well, I think this Champions League season is actually, contrary to expectations, is looking to be better than it's been for a while. Like, I'm generally of the view that the Champions League has been bad for the last sort of 5-6 years.
Do you think this format shift has really affected it?
No, I don't, because I don't think it's to do with the format. I think it's to do with the predictability. Like, I think that having Man City and Real Madrid as the two best teams in Europe consistently for a lot of the last 10 years was really bad for the Champions League. And I think that also the fact that both Chelsea eventually won the Champions League in 2012 and then Manchester City won it in 2023 means that really Arsenal are kind of the last English team left, and I suppose Tottenham to a lesser extent, with that sense of like Champions League quest. Like Arsenal and Tottenham have both been to a Champions League final, lost the Champions League final. But generally, I don't think that. I think a lot of the shine has gone off the Champions League in the last decade or so because of that predictability. And I feel like sort of maybe the back end of the 2010s it was kind of quite good, but since then maybe not so much.
Yeah, I think it kind of coincided with the Messi Ronaldo era. It almost became a kind of competition between two men to see who could get the most goals, and it suddenly everyone cared about most goals scored by an individual in the group stage and all that sort of stuff, and it became a little bit kind of, to Jack's point, a bit not really a tournament. Whereas, I agree, this year it feels like it's a tournament of teams this year. Like PSG, they've sold Mbappe, but they now just look like 11 players fighting together. And ironically, Real Madrid look a bit more like PSG used to.
Real Madrid are finally looking. It feels like I might regret saying this before they play Arsenal, but I've got no emotional skin in that game, so I can. I feel like with Real Madrid, it almost feels like the criticisms that people made of them over the course of the last 10 years are finally coming true, right? Yeah. People always used to say they're a bad team who find a way to win somehow, and then now it's like the second part of that equation doesn't seem quite so true. But you're right, like the fact that PSG they had the Messi, Neymar, Mbappe era, it was really bad. They've got rid of those three guys, and now they're the most watchable team in Europe. I think they're amazing to watch.
It's so good in a way that like some people claim you don't get anymore in football, and when they did have the three superstars, I'm not a PSG fan, but I got frustrated watching them because you'd be like, you just put some effort in and you could win more. But I mean, Inter, another team, great team, play a different system, play two strikers, great defence. I think there's a lot of interesting stories in this year's Champions League, and kind of whoever wins, it's quite a big, nice story, I think. Yeah. When you look at the teams that are left, there's going to be like a really sort of joyousness with whoever wins it this year.
I find it interesting that like the natural order seems to have been disrupted a little. Well, we'll see what happens with Real Madrid in the Champions League, and we're going great tournament. That the natural order's changing in the Premier League, and we go, it's a crap Premier League. I mean, that's a bit strange, isn't it, for me? Because the natural order should always be challenged, whichever way you look. Because PSG finally look like they've got their act together, and they're winning games convincingly.
But I think with the Premier League, you know, who are the best supported team in the Premier League? Manchester United.
Yeah.
Where are Manchester United in the table?
Yeah.
And, you know, I think those two things might be connected.
All right, and finally, the one thing we haven't spoken about really across, even if you look at the Champions League or the Premier League, is that VAR and how that has potentially affected the way we look at football, especially this season as well. I mean, I can't tell you the amount of times we've had podcasts, analysis after shows about referee decisions with VAR, the match experience changing. How do you think that has changed things for you as a fan, but also as a journalist?
I think VAR has made football much worse. I think that it has. I don't think it's made a difference to the sort of broader issues of like who is where in the table, despite what some people on the internet would suggest. But I think it has really reduced the sense of kind of chaos and drama that you get in individual games. Like if you're watching an exciting game, you want to see a late goal go in, and then everybody loses their mind and runs around screaming, right? And you just don't get that anymore because you get like an 8-minute wait while they find a reason to try and disallow the goal. I'm afraid I'm unable to give you an objective answer on this. I am almost insane in my conviction against VAR.
You are very
Really?
Yeah,
you hate it?
I hate it. I think it should be fully abolished now. I think any tweak or change or little adjustment that you make to VAR is simply, all you're doing is if you do that, you're accepting the premises of VAR. I think VAR has destroyed football, and I think it should be fully removed as soon as possible.
Go on, Duncan. I mean, he's laid it on the
stance.
line there, isn't he?
That is a stance. I mean, I can see the argument for it. I think the issue is that you can't really go back now because it only came in because everyone complained so much. Like we talked about kind of the media noise, but you know, errors by referees and or linesmen were kind of covered to so big an extent after every weekend that it kind of forced the introduction of it. And I think what it showed up was that football is quite a sort of nuanced game. You know, a lot of the laws it's not black or white, it's like interpretation. And it also showed that most fans and most pundits don't actually know a lot of the laws.
Yeah.
You know, there was all these debates we've had in the last 5-6 years about, you know, the minutiae of this and that. And I think, to Jack's point, I do think it is boring. It does make the sport worse, but I just don't see a scenario where we can't not have it now. I think we've got to get to a point where it is at least technologically better. I mean, the semi-automated
fouls,
you know, is a bit better than what it was before. And I think you just kind of need to make those incremental changes, and hopefully, you know, it does become a little bit more or less intrusive.
No, I thought you had more.
I've got tons.
I don't think we've got time.
I could talk about this for hours, but I'm not sure that's what people tune in for.
You'd be surprised, Jeds. Honestly, I really appreciate you joining us, Jack, Duncan as well, and also thank you guys for watching the video. Make sure you like the video, so subscribe to the channel. We'll be back very soon for another one. If you want to watch more episodes of the show, please subscribe to the channel. We'll be joined by the likes of David Ornstein, Matt Slater, Adam Crafton, Carl Anker, and plenty more through the season. If you'd like to listen to the episodes in full in audio form, search The Athletic FC wherever you get your podcasts from.